How responsible for its violence does a game make you feel? Now, obviously, every game will have different goals in its design, and as a result, will have a broad variety of answers to that question. There's loads of games where you can sneak up on someone and press a button to take them down, whatever take them down ends up meaning. From that point forward, your character takes over and acts out the animation. This serves a design of, say, trying to navigate through a level with stealth for whichever reason the designers come up with. Enemies are obstacles between the player and their goal, and the point of a stealth kill in most cases is just to remove that obstacle. The act of violence itself is not the point, it's just that the obstacle in the player's way looks like a person. This inherently leaves you feeling disconnected from the violence happening on screen though, which is what most violent games actually want anyways. Most of the time, the action is there for lighthearted fun, and some people would stop finding it fun if it started to feel too personal or too real. Some games do want you to care about it to some extent though, and they have a few different ways to do it. They might give you an option between a lethal and a non-lethal takedown for the sake of role-playing and just leave it at that. Lots of games will do things like this when they want you to be able to roleplay a bit without being a full-on RPG when it comes to making big choices that affect the game's setting or its characters. Some games could just make the takedowns really brutal to drive home the themes of the setting and the story. The Last of Us 2 is a story about, amongst other things, violence. The game tells this story outside of its cutscenes with brutality. Both this game and its predecessor use brutal animations to tell their respective stories. Every fight, whether you win or lose, is a desperate scrap that often ends with animations that almost make you wish Grandma had walked in on a sex scene instead of them. In The Last of Us Part 2, if you gave Ellie a tranquilizer gun like in a Metal Gear game, aside from it clashing with the setting in general, it would also result in the game being worse at depicting its themes. So stealth kills are brutal, with finely detailed animations to depict a small struggle each time Ellie takes someone down. This storytelling can progress completely independently of any cutscenes or dialogue if the player chooses to take an upgrade for Ellie that speeds up her stealth kills. Rather than playing the same animation sped up, the game replaces the old drawn-out animation where Ellie stabs her enemy in the throat and struggles for a moment while they bleed out with a new animation, where Ellie now slits the enemy's throat and throws in a quick stab to the chest for good measure. Overall, it's a lot colder and more efficient than the original animation. Some other games will choose to make you care about the violence with how the world reacts to it more so than how visceral the visuals themselves are. In Kingdom Come Deliverance and its sequel, the difference between a lethal and a non-lethal takedown exists outside of your own headcanon for your character. A stealth kill means that the target can't be woken up to come after you later, but it also means the crime you're committing is a lot more severe. It's not assault, it's murder. This means that if you get caught doing it, the punishment will be much more severe. On top of that, attempting to stealthily take down an enemy has a chance to backfire. If this happens, they break out of your hold and turn to face you, which places you in a direct confrontation with them. Now you've been caught. You most likely are going to have to abandon the hope of reaching your goal with stealth or abandon the goal altogether, and in either case, word of your crimes is going to get around. This serves the design goals of immersing you in the game's setting and making it feel alive and real. The intention is to give weight to your decisions and make the world feel reactive. There is a game, however, that doesn't have any of this, but it still makes me feel more implicated in the virtual violence than any other. It's Blade and Sorcery. And I want to specify that I mean that in a good way. This is probably my overall favorite VR game that I've played so far. Despite everything I'm going to say about how sadistic it makes me feel sometimes, the combat is incredibly fun. Playing this game might make you look like the Star Wars kid with a brick strapped to your head, but beneath that brick, you feel as cool as he did swinging that stick around. That's usually all that's on my mind with this game. Maybe I let out some frustration here and there. I'm far from the first person to work in retail and end up with some bottled up rage. But there are other times where that feeling that I'm doing something sadistic starts to creep up in the back of my mind. Or maybe I just stream the game on Discord and someone reacts to me violating the Geneva Convention.
I cannot wait to see the video of this thing. Like, no heinous shit you do without editing.
Oh, she's dead. Whoops.
Oh my god, this game, I swear.
And for a while, I wasn't even sure if the game was doing this on purpose. The game has a story of sorts after its 1.0 update, and before that came out, I expected it to be pretty straightforward and paint you as a good guy that was fighting bad guys. Without giving anything specific away, that ended up not quite being the case. It's a little bit more complicated than that. What I do know is that when I showed my partner footage that I recorded from this game for this video, she said she'd be worried about me if she didn't know any better. Which, like, yeah, that's fair. I will readily tell you that I'm a goblin in a man's body, and I just get a kick out of playing with pretend corpses sometimes.
Oops. I'm a vicious serial killer. This game is turning me into a murderer.
But what is it that makes the game provoke this response? The effect this game has isn't wholly unique from what other VR action games have. Violence does generally end up feeling more visceral in VR. A game with brutal combat animations will have that feeling to an extent, but the fact that in VR you're coming up with the movements yourself brings it to a new level. You're not pressing buttons to command a psychopath, you are just being the psychopath yourself. However, I do think that this sensation is stronger in Blade and Sorcery than in a lot of other VR titles. Some titles probably have a similar effect, but it's the strongest example that I've played so far. If you look at Boneworks for comparison, it has a similar level of physics and interaction with the world and enemies, but it also has a lot going on that softens the impact of its violence. The enemies in that game are mostly non-human, whether they're weird little robot headcrabs or hologram textured apes. The few human enemies that do exist in the game are all clones of the guy that you play as, which could be played in a disturbing way, but it seems like the developer's aim was more so to make them funny than anything else.
Oh, what up, son?
And if that's not enough, on top of being a literal simulation because it's a video game, the game's story also takes place inside of a simulation, further disconnecting you from whatever torture you decide to inflict on your clones. But in Blade and Sorcery, the enemies are all modeled as normal and distinct people, meaning they have eyes to look back at you with, while you do things to them that would make the guards at Guantanamo Bay blush. When you get in a fight in Blade and Sorcery, it's up to you to figure out how to win it. There are basically no predetermined animations for your character to act out. You pick your weapons, swords, axes, maces, daggers, bows, magic, whatever, and then you have to decide how to use it. Say you have a mace, and a guy's coming at you with a weapon. You can decide to attack his legs and knock him over. Now that he's on the ground, he's going to try to get back up. Do you hit him in the head? That definitely feels pretty brutal, but if you hit him somewhere else, then you'll just make his death feel more drawn out and torturous. Say you decide not to choose. You're just not going to think about it and swing wildly. But that doesn't mean what happens won't also be brutal and violent. It just means that you fumbled your way into doing it. You very directly held that character's life in your hands no matter what you chose. If you want to make your way through enemies more quietly, then there are no canned stealth takedowns to help you along the way. If you want to cover someone's mouth to keep them quiet while you bring your dagger up to their neck, then you have to make that choice and act it out entirely on your own. The point is that whatever choice you do or don't make, the outcome will probably still feel gruesome, and it will definitely be the result of your actions. The game won't bear any of that responsibility for you. Before the game's full release, it was just a sandbox, but one of the maps was a lot different from the others. In the Outpost, rather than being an arena where enemies just spawn into a singular contained space for you to fight, you explore a map that's randomly built from a pool of dozens of different rooms that get pieced together and filled with enemies. In its unfinished form, there was a vacuum where the Outpost's story would be, and any context for what you were doing was left up to you to either determine yourself or to just not think about too much so that the nightmares stay away. You could interpret it as an escape where all these enemies stand in the way between you and your freedom and you're just doing what you have to get out of there. But to me, it always felt different than that. It felt like you chose to come here. You're not starting in like a cell, unarmed and supervised. You're equipped for a fight and you're catching the people here off guard. Yeah, they're ready to fight once they see you, but it still makes you the intruder that they have to defend themselves against. A lot of them pace around like they're standing guard, but a lot of them just kind of look like they're doing other things instead. The game does this in an effort to give you opportunities for stealth kills. So a lot of the time you'll enter a room with an enemy with their back to you. But this gives off the impression that a lot of them are working on something or taking in a view and not really concerned about intruders. Then you show up and change that. I am, however, still just talking about the early access version of the game. How did the 1.0 update change that? Well, for starters, they added blood spray. And the enemy AI was about as dumb as it had ever been. The AI was probably the most criticized part of the game immediately following its 1.0 release. They were fairly simple and had a tendency to approach more like they're looking for a kiss than for a fight. But now there's way more weapons and magic and whole new abilities to play with in the game. And a story. There's different factions of enemies that you encounter, and there's a bunch of notes lying around that you can read, and there's a shopkeeper who gives you a little spiel the first time you meet him. And it turns out my interpretation was actually right. I am entering outposts by choice, and I am there to take something that these people have and kill whoever gets in my way. One time, I even tried to clear an outpost without killing anyone, and it kinda just felt like I was playing the game wrong. I finished the level, but it consisted of me creeping around and then just running whenever anyone saw me. The enemies would follow me for a bit and would sometimes alert more enemies, and that would make me just run more. But eventually I just reached the end of the level and that was kind of it. I'm sure I could do this more stealthily than I did with a lot more patience and maybe some practice, but the game still doesn't really seem designed to support playing like that exclusively. Plus, the AI's fixed now, sort of. The developers basically just came out and said that the AI is sort of made up of spaghetti code, and that's a result of the game's scope and dev team size changing drastically over the course of development, and that they'll just start AI from the ground up in their next game, which I'd say is probably the right call. So while a bunch of the weird behavior that the AI picked up right after the 1.0 launch is gone, it's still janky, and it's just gonna stay that way. But ultimately, it still works, because Blade and Sorcery is not a hard game. It's not really trying to be. It seems like the point leans more so away from challenging you mechanically and more towards finding the fun and experimenting with the mechanics given to you. The enemy AI being kind of dumb services this end, because it makes them better targets for your experiments with the options that the game has given to you. And the results of those are usually some act of severe brutality. If you were to take the VR out of this game, it would probably just cease to stand out entirely. And I don't mean that in a bad way. If anything, I mean it as a compliment on the skill of the designers because they've made something unique that takes advantage of VR to do things that non-VR games can't. The point of Blade and Sorcery is not the destination, it's the journey. And that journey is violent and gruesome. It's not about the story, that's just there to give you some more context for your actions and the setting if you want it. It's not about earning more money, that's just so you can buy more armor and more weapons. It's not about finding crystals, those are there to give you more abilities to use against your enemies. And unlike many other games that would shrivel into nothing without their violence, this game isn't doing much to obfuscate its purpose. That purpose is to give you as complete and free of a playground for combat as it can. Sure, the game is fun because it's a physics playground with medieval fantasy weapons and magic, but it's also fun because it's so fucking brutal. If you replaced the human enemies with cartoon slimes that disappear in a poof of smoke when you kill them, it wouldn't be as much fun. If you took away the sharp and deadly weapons and replaced them with safer foam or wooden replicas, it wouldn't be as much fun. If you did anything to round off the rough and gruesome edges on this game, it would stop being Blade and Sorcery. Blade and Sorcery isn't just a virtual sandbox for trying out different weapons and magic. It's a sandbox for trying out sadism and brutality. It's a sandbox where you can set aside all the very tangible reasons you aren't like that in real life and just be a villain. The point is the pretending that you do and that the game doesn't do. It feels so violent because the entire point of the game is violence. Thank you for watching.
Welcome, traveler. Seems I have a hard bag.